Did you know that Walt Disney was obsessed with color? So much so that he created an entire television series about it. But that's not all. When Disneyland was being created, he didn't use architects to design it. He used animators, like John Hench. And it's no coincidence that John Hench was also a master colorist. John Hench died in 2004, but we know people who worked with him, and we brought them in to talk with us. Now, I thought I knew about color, but it turns out there's a lot more to it than you might think. This is Heidi Hirsch and Don Carson, both former Imagineers and masters of color and concept design in their own right. John Hench passed his knowledge to them, and today we're going to pass it to you as they teach us about color design for attractions like Splash Mountain and Mickey's Toontown and more. This is part one of Color, the Other Storyteller.
I was an illustration major who loved Disneyland as a kid and didn't realize that that was a job you could have. And as soon as I found out it was, that was my laser focus. I was hoovered in during the Disney decade when they were hiring anybody who could draw, and was at Imagineering during the late 80s, early 90s. Left mid 90s because I saw there was an opportunity to take a lot of the lessons we learned at Imagineering and apply them to other forms of entertainment, including video games, and created this weird hybrid career where I jumped back and forth between theme park design and video game design. And I also spent 7.5 years working with the Hedema Group, with Phil Hedema. Wonderful time there. And in the last 40 years, just bouncing back and forth between Disney and Universal, working as a freelancer. And currently, I'm the senior art director at Mighty Coconut, and we create a virtual miniature golf game. But we bring with it all of the storytelling that we learned at Imagineering to these virtual environments. And so while at Disney you could spend 3 to 5 years between concept and opening, we produce a new course every 6 to 7 weeks. So it's like opening a new attraction every 6 to 7 weeks. So it definitely scratches the same itch that theme park design did.
Wow.
But it's all done from my studio in Oregon.
That's incredible. It sounds like a lot, very sounds similar to the way South Park makes their shows. They're very much just like in order, very quick, and like you have that pressure, that constant pressure to deliver. There's no time to re-ideate or second guess yourself.
Reflect. Yeah.
Well, and there's actually a little bit of an advantage to that, because I worked at art and design at Universal, and we would do the every quick show, Grinchmas, all the haunted houses, 8 haunted houses in 12 months. I mean, you can see the timeline, but it gave you sort of that license to experiment and try things. And if it didn't work, that's okay, because it wasn't going to be there that long anyway. And then you just don't do it again the next time. So maybe you feel that same way.
Yep, without a doubt. But it really, one imagines when you're young that you want to get on a really prestigious project, but it's actually those quick and dirty ones that they don't have time to second guess your choices. You just have to get it out. So something like Toontown, which was like, just go build something for kids, had no scrutiny, while Indiana Jones, which was happening simultaneously, everybody was micromanaging all those details that went into that attraction. So we got away with murder.
They all wanted to be in on the iconic Disney project, and then meanwhile, Toontown was this great little place that sort of flew
got away with
it.
And,
and not only that, I mean, my contention is that some of the best places are not the e-ticket attractions. They're those small, and that's why I'm really regretting the fact that Frontierland is going away, because that was that nice atmospheric place that you could just sort of relax for a little while and get away from the theme park busyness.
It was my father and I used to go when I was still with Imagineering. We would go down there, we would have dinner, and then we would sit in Frontierland right around where the horseshoe saloon is, on a bench.
It's not a salon, I guarantee.
Salon, not a salon. But backstage is a different story, Jeff. But okay, for the sake of on stage, the saloon, he'd sit across and watch the Mark Twain go by. I'd go shoot at the shooting gallery, which is crushing me that it's not there. There were those moments, those magical moments that people don't necessarily register, because it's all about the attractions. And the beauty of the Disney parks is there are so many wonderful little darling little pockets
Mm.
that are created, and now they're being taken out, and that's really really sad. That's
Yeah,
my
and even little things like the checkerboards on Main Street USA. Do you remember there used to be
yes, of
Mhm.
a
course.
barrel and
Yeah.
you could play checkers and take some time out, and the
Mhm.
same thing with
Mhm.
Tom Sawyer's Island where you can just go take some time and explore, so, yeah, that's a shame.
One of the things I really loved about Frontierland, New Orleans, Tom Sawyer's Island was the fact that Fantasmic took place on that space. You know, when you go
Yeah.
to the Disney World Fantasmic, it's a proscenium stage show, and it's an amazing show. Like, don't get me wrong. But there was something about the California version where you were on that island. You were walking around New Orleans. You maybe you went and canoed or kayaked on that water. And then
Right.
4 or 5 hours later, it's on fire. And like there was something about
Literally.
yes, literally. And there was something about the fact that it felt so organic. Like, the whole idea of these characters running around that you meet, and how, you can meet Mickey, but not if he's on the parade, because there's Mickey and only Mickey. And that same ideology of like these characters that are running around playing in the same space you're playing are now having this epic battle as if it's in the middle of a Disney movie. And that you just didn't get that at Disney World, because you walked all the way down, you sat in the stadium area, and you watched the proscenium show, and it felt more like a stage show as opposed to something that just popped up and happened right there. And I'm definitely going to miss that.
It's also a moment of pause. If you think about it, going to the park, you get ready, you go there, you find a seat, you're sitting around, people are talking. It's another sense of community within the community. And those are those little moments, again, that I go back to, that create memories that linger. So when they say something like Ixnay go Frontierland, or we're going to take this out, people get really upset. I will tell you that I will protest when they take out Storybook. I love that more than any other ride there. It's magical, truly. And that's the one that got me excited. That's the one that got me into miniatures,
Oh,
is
really?
going through that ride and then going next door and getting the tuna fish sandwich.
Turkey leg for
It
me.
almost reminds me, if you all remember in the early 90s, before California Adventure and City Walk, not City Walk, what is it? Downtown
Ooh,
Disney.
dangerous words.
Yeah, I just almost, yeah, former
Wow, I
Universal
believe
employee
that's
here.
going to be an edit.
Right, yeah. No, I'm not gonna edit, I'll leave that in there. But no, if you remember, you went to the parking lot in the 70s, 80s, 90s, for those of you who
Yeah.
can remember that, and it was a barren wasteland, and there were gigantic, power line poles going right through
Mhm.
the parking lot. And it was almost like this transition, like you were going into the Wizard of Oz, where it went from this, and this is kind of that segue into our topic of color, where you went from this gray concrete jungle to the color of Main Street USA as you went through that small portal. And
Mhm.
that to me just is part of that transition from boring, mundane city life into this magical world of fantasy. And I think that's what was inadvertently captured by just that Main Street, but also by Frontierland there.
Yeah,
You
that was
talk
a childhood epiphany of mine, was riding the boats in Pirates of the Caribbean and then mentally knowing I was only about 100 yards away from our car. You know,
Isn't that
Oh,
crazy?
that those two
Is
worlds could coexist.
you talk about that portal where you go in under the train track, and the classic Frank Lloyd Wright designs for the Johnson building, Johnson Wax,
Mhm.
where you go in, and all of his architecture is the same thing. That portal transition that takes you into a smaller space and then opens up this amazing world. And that's where you go into the under the train station, you check the posters to see what's running and what's not running. And then there you are. You're on Main Street, USA. You've just transported time. And at some point, we're going to talk about the color of that.
yeah. So with color, now this is a near and dear topic to my heart, because when I went to architecture school, it was like I just took architectural classes because I wasn't in architecture school, but I was in engineering. But I said I'm going to do as much of this Imagineering stuff as I possibly can. So I would go to the College of Art and Design, or Environmental Design,
Mhm.
at University of Colorado, And but what those professors would say is, we're afraid, we're scared to death of color. Don't even try it. Just use pencil because you'll mess up color.
Mm.
And so I always kind of had this thing, well, if they can't do it, I certainly can't do it.
Wow.
And then, yeah,
I
and then of course Eddie
wow.
Sato and talked about how John Hench would always say, push the color. So
Right.
tell us about
Right.
color and how you use that in themed attraction design.
We work hand in hand with the concept designers, and that's why it's so great to have Don here with us. The story is continually brought to life. Color talks with the story. The color, the period of the time. If you want to talk about Main Street, USA, there's specific historical colors that were used. There are also colors that are used in order to bring a sense of maybe not full scale, but as you know, Main Street, I believe, is 3/4 inch scale. I could be wrong, so edit me
Five
out if I'm wrong, but I believe it is. It talks about, so when you are going down that particular street and you're looking at the early turn of the centuries, you're getting an experience of what it's like. You can't throw in hot pink. It's pretty simple. There's no real high, well, people will argue with me when it comes to science on that, but as far as I'm concerned, that is telling a historical story. And then color will talk about the future. Color can talk about a jungle environment, a more natural. It lends itself and supports the story of what the designers are moving forward, always talking about the experience. And I think Don could then, piggyback on that and talk about how he works with colorists and how that comes about.
Yeah, I think that it's important to know, especially with something as large as a theme park attraction, that the quality of your show is only enhanced by the number of co-creators in it. I think that we kind of imagine that there's or one or two creative leads that are sort of running the show. And I think a good creative lead is somebody who can establish the groundwork, so the rules of engagement, and then really, really trust the team that's going to go out and start building it. And so in the case of color, I have aspirations, but I also have a clear knowledge that there are people who have a deeper emotional connection to the choices that they make. And so as a lead, it's trusting them and partnering with them. And so Heidi and our mutual friend, Karen Thompson, and I have worked together extensively over the years. And it's just, this is the kind of feel I'm going for. What do you think? And then have that conversation. And I think something Heidi was saying too about throwing pink, hot pink into Main Street. There are such things as anachronisms. And a color can be an anachronism where it actually is fighting the story you're trying to tell. So as part of your partnership with a colorist, it's coming up with an understanding of what mood do I want to bring the audience into, and how can the choices of colors support that mood that I'm trying to convey.
I think a great example of that was when Dawn, and I'm jumping ahead, I know, but since we're editing, I can do this. Dawn and I working together on Mickey's Toontown. Do you remember the first thing you told me to do?
Remind me.
I plan on it. I plan on it. One brain cell working fiercely right now. He had me go over to the animation department because I was working on downtown Toontown. And he said, I want you to create the look of the backgrounds of the classics. So I went over to the animation studio and I put the white gloves on and I sat there, and in front of me were the most extraordinary, amazing, classic coloring illustrations of the backgrounds of Pinocchio and 101 Dalmatians and Lady and the Tramp, and many, many more. But those are the ones that come to mind. And remember, you're looking at these wonderful, wonderful pieces of work, and It's up on a huge screen. But I sat there with maybe an 11 by 17 piece of paper that was taped on a board, and there were all these literally paint marks along the side where the artist had figured out what colors he wants and done a little bit of matching, and maybe there was a coffee spill, who knows, or a sandwich crumb. But you're looking at something this big, and it was extraordinary. And within that, you're seeing a wall that did not have one bit of gray in it. The wall had purples and pinks and greens. And I learned strong color combinations from that. Now, the whole other area of Toontown was different, but we were more into the muted colors. We were more into the background look. It was an exceptional opportunity.
Now, when you're doing that, is it done mostly by sort of feel and innate talent, or are you using some of the, not want to say traditional, but some of the like complementary, or I'm going to screw up the word, triangular, triad, like using those tried and true, or I should say more like orthodox educational methodologies?
Don might do that. I'm going to jump in on that one too, and then I'll stop talking for about 12 seconds. I had an art teacher, and they would go and analyze. I'm adjusting. They would analyze paintings, and I remember this woman saying, as if to say, "La la 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 la." Picasso would think, "Oh, complimentary." I went, "No. These guys didn't give a rat's patootie. It was an instinct. It was an instinct in them that said, this is the color that I need to put here." Could you imagine the water lilies having somebody, I have trouble here. What do I do? I'll throw in a complementary color. It was all intuitive. You might analyze it that way, but to me, it's a part of looking at what's been done, utilizing that as a foundation, and then moving forward.
Well, if I can build off of what Heidi was saying, I think the word you were looking for was tertiary color, potentially. One of the advantages of going to art school is the foundational information that you learn, but that foundational information is only to reference and give you context. So knowing the tertiaries and knowing the complementaries is incredibly important. But as Heidi said, a lot of it is intuitive and emotional, and you just reference back on the rules to make sure that you're not, completely flying off the handle.
Yeah, much agreed to that. And John Hench had a very systematic way of doing things. He worked with the color system Plashare, and he had his little chips, and he'd set them down on the table, and he would have them all lined up, and I'd go into his office, and he would explain he wants 50% of this color, 25% of that color, 3% of that color. You can put the rest in there, and then I'd leave his office, my colleague and I, Joan O'Brien, and we'd leave his office going, "Oh God, Jesus." And we would go back to our office with our light, do our best with Liquitex. That's what we were using at the time. Remember, this is old school. We were still hand painting all the color boards.
So when you say 3%, I want 3% of chartreuse. How are you making sure you're not at 4% or 3.75%?
Wish and a prayer. Just, just that if you could make just that, oh my gosh, that itty bitty change in the color. So, you'd have samples of a bunch of them laying out, and just, and then I'd go back to his office, and we'd lay it out and thinking, we got this wire. We're good. We're solid. And he'd go, "No, I said I wanted 3% of that."
Yeah, one of my John Hench memories was his office was upstairs, up the staircase from the main lobby. And at one point I was passing through that area, and his secretary was bustling, and they were getting John ready to fly to Paris. And I went, "Oh, that's interesting." But right leaning against her desk were these 3 by 3 foot like cardboard cards, a stack of them, and each of them had a different color on it. And they were taking the cards to Paris so that John could see the color in Paris. And until you travel somewhere like that, you don't realize that it doesn't matter what it looks like in Glendale. It's what it looks like in Paris. And so that was something you did. You went there to see what it looked like before you decided on what the color was going to be.
Wow.
Well, and I think you brought that up in one of your podcasts, that the sun in Florida for Toontown is different than it is in California as well.
It'll wipe out a color with the speed of lightning too. So if you think you've got a beautiful red on opening day, 60 days later, you got a beautiful one.
That was actually, I was a part of the designer, it was the enhancements program. Chuck Ballou and I would be flown out to the parks, and we would wander the parks, and we were given a budget for what things to improve each year. And one of the challenges they had with the Magic Kingdom was that Main Street was all sort of pale. It was lights, all very, very light color, all whites basically from the eye. And one of the challenges they had while Disneyland was constantly being scrutinized by the studio, Florida had not been as scrutinized. And so each project has color boards, and the idea is that whenever they repaint a building, they would reference those initial color boards, and then they would match it as best they could for the finished product. But what was happening in Magic Kingdom was, rather than referencing the color boards, they would just match the faded color. And over the years, everything got lighter and lighter and lighter till Main Street became all various shades of white. And that was one of the enhancements, was the recoloring of Main Street for Magic Kingdom.
I did not know that, but that makes perfect sense. My classic story is the Arch studio tour, MGM studio tour. And the Arch, when you're going into the animation area, and at the bottom of it is this beautiful, some really up and coming young buck of a designer painted this beautiful patina where the guard was, the bumper guard. And I remember a great guy I was working with, Kenny Danbury, said, "You see that?" I said, "Yeah, it's great. It's beautiful." He goes, "Yeah, that's going to last one day." And I go, "Why?" And he goes, "Because all those baby strollers are going to hit that, and they're going to put all those black marks on it. And the guy from whatever, Disney, DDD, whoever, is going to come out with his cart at 3:00 in the morning, and he's going to look at this and he's go, green. Yeah, I got that." And whoop, before he went in seconds, all that beautiful hard work patina is long gone. So you might, what you put, and Mike Morris put me in the field right away, because he said, "What's on the board ain't going to be in the field."
So let me ask that. Before we get into the slides that you have, let me ask this. I know that, as for Indiana Jones, for example, there was originally this amazing effect where ice, or rocks, was falling almost onto or in front of the drivers. And about a week into opening, they shut it off, right? Because maintenance or operations decided it was too difficult to operate. This has always just been folklore for me, but seeing you nod your head tells me this is true. So I guess the question is, in that scenario where you may be bringing in a very specialty artist, but you are handing it off to another department, how do you maintain that relationship to make sure that either A, you don't waste time designing something that's not going to be maintained, or B, I guess operations is able to say, hey, we need things done in a certain way in order to make our lives easier, or whatever that marriage is supposed to be.
Yeah, we as designers, we learned really early that anything from 8 foot up, will pretty much stick around. But once it's down around the retail or power washing area, it's going to change based upon the needs of operations. And so I'll go back 20, 30 years from a thing I worked on, and everything from 8 foot up is, other than a little dusty, is pretty much intact. Everything below has evolved with time. So you're partnering with the operators, but I think as a design group, You want to instill simple ideas about the philosophy of the design, so that when you're gone, because as soon as opening day comes, you're a guest. It's not your attraction anymore. They call it turnkey, where you're handing the keys over to the operators, and then you are not invited back. You can't wander around freely in Toontown after it opens. You want the philosophy to be simplistic enough, or simple enough, or buy-intoable enough, that when they say, oh, we got to paint this wall, well, I'm going to paint it this color because this supports the story that's happening in this environment, as opposed to, I don't know, I got some green, let's just put that on there.
And are there any times that you're allowed to, I don't know, yellow tag something that's like, in the event that this requires maintenance, you have to come back to WDI or Universal Creative or something like that to prevent that deterioration?
Luckily, there's a show quality standards department, SQS, in Disneyland and at Walt Disney World, and there's a team of sort of partnered Disneyland employees and Imagineers, and their job is to police that.
Got it.
Is to say, there are color boards, we should reference them, and it's sort of a interesting bedfellows when it comes to the needs of operations and the needs of storytelling. But I think that Disney is unique, and Universal, I would say, were probably the same, is unique in let's make that change, but how does it affect the story we're trying to tell?
Sure.
And can we take this budget that says we have to replace all the handrails and plus them up so that it's an additional thing that the guests will feel that things are always getting better and richer and more detailed because of the sort of policing of that story.
So in the case of like the Indiana Jones effect that got canned, that would have been a discussion between operations and SQ.
SQS, yeah. In that particular case, and only because Tony told this story to me personally, it's one of those, just like the Yeti, the giant Yeti, is that it's best intentions, great idea, but in practice, because it was such a new idea, to buy an industrial-sized ice machine and then dye the ice so that it looked like rock, and then every time a vehicle came by, this thing would spit out a sheet of ice that would hit the ground and shatter. It's just so good on paper, so clever on paper, but it just couldn't hold up. Sure. It just couldn't hold up. And also there's lots of unforeseen stuff that you just don't know about. During that enhancements program, we came up with all these props for Liberty Square, and we spent thousands and thousands of dollars on crates, and we got a cannon, and all this. And about 2 weeks, we went back there, and it was gone. It was all gone, and there was nobody on operations that would fess up to what had happened to it. But it had gotten in the way of power washing, and so that's not going to happen. So you have to get a partnership and a buy-in from them that this is important. Yeah. The only thing that survived is we put a bird cage up in a balcony, and
over
I think
8 feet tall.
Yeah, to this day it's still there, but that cannon is gone.
Interesting.
Wow.
I definitely, even in the seasonal entertainment and event world, this echoes so hard, and it has taken time to be okay with that, like to understand that it's not malicious. Sometimes but there's times, right, you work so hard as a creative developing something, and then you hand off your baby, and then you come see your baby later, and you're like, what is this ogre? And like, I just try, but understanding that like it isn't malicious. It is about taking a paper idea and making it practical. It's definitely something I feel like we don't, as designers, get taught. And so you end up with just a lot of angst, and it becomes sort of a them versus us mentality. And like, but no one talks about it. No one teaches that that's not the case. And I kind of wish there was more discussion and education on both sides.
It's partnering. You have to really, really partner with them. And a lot of times it's here comes the art director. Oh, the hoity-toity art director is going to tell us what to do. You have to break through that almost every project and find a way for them to own it. At opening day, you want the guy that painted that wall to bring his family and say, I made this.
I made this.
And claim the entire attraction, because when you're gone and that key's handed over, that guy's going to still be there and he's going to make those changes. And if he owns it, he's going to make changes that support the story and not whatever the power washing guy needs.
The transfer, the pride of ownership, I think, is very, very important. The other thing is, and it's the hardest thing in the world to do, but once it leaves your boards, you've got to let it go. You got to say, job well done. I have turned in my best effort, and now I have to let it go. But if you do have the ability to have some kind of relationship, or it comes back to field, it really comes to field experience. Again, I'm going to repeat, sending me down to Florida very early on and teaching me the relationship of what happens to your work and your concepts once it leaves your boards. It gives you a better idea. So when you come back and you're working on something and somebody says, oh, let's do this, this, and this, you can say, yeah, it's pretty opening day, but it's not going to last. They're going to take it out with the speed of lightning. So let's put our effort into something else. It's not the most popular thing you say, but in retrospect, it's what's going to make things stay longer and be more preserved and a part of the story.
Heidi, why don't you tell us about what you're doing now?
Oh, I can do that. I actually don't go backwards. I go backwards. I go now and then backwards because it's faster. So
perfect.
30-second elevator speech, reveal studio architecture. Before that was Larry Wyatt, Wyatt Design. Before that was Riva Creative, worked on the Dubai Park and the Motion Gate Bollywood parks. Before that, I was with Visual Terrain. So I was working with Lisa Passamani Green and her team doing light. I didn't do the lighting. I was actually more of a community liaison, which I think is a catchword. And before Lisa, at some point, I was with Sony Development, working on the Metreons up in San Francisco. Before that, I went to school. I got laid off from Disney way back in 90, say it out loud, and went back to school. So I got two choices: go look for a gig or go to school. I think I'll go to school. So I went back to school for interior design. Prior to Disney, I was working in some of the better sweatshops in LA building architectural models. So I took those skills. Mike Morris hired me at Disney because in my portfolio, he saw that I had done a mountain range with little tiny trees. And he said, did you do that? I said, yeah. And I got the gig. So there's 30 or 40 or 102 years in a nutshell. But in each different case, I went from a model builder to an interior designer to a project. Oh, did I miss Disney? Oh, yeah, somewhere in there, I actually did Disney too. And that's where I met Dawn. Whoops, missed WDI completely. That's a Freudian. And we met, and I worked on Splash Mountain with you first. And then from Splash Mountain, we worked on Mickey's Toontown. Mm-hmm. So that's all sort of an evolution, the whole jack of all trades, master of none. But it gave me such a better sense of all the different disciplines and what it takes to make something happen. And oh yeah, I worked with John Hench doing color. That's where this all came about. Thank you, John Hench. And working with him and understanding what color is all about.
I think for the benefit of the younger audiences, we need to talk about who John Hench is or was.
Good point.
Because not everyone knows.
John used to go into the park, and Don, you probably heard this with Walt.
And yeah.
Would come up to Walt Disney and say, "Oh, are you Walt Disney?" And he would turn to John and go, "No, that's Walt Disney," because the two gentlemen looked so much alike each other. John was right there in the beginning. He was instrumental. His history is phenomenal with Disney and doing the early work. And I'm going to defer to you for that, Dawn. If you have
He
any,
was,
or I don't have as much.
well,
I don't have as much.
well, it's the Nine Old Men era. I mean, he was, when you see those World of Color Walt walking around Imagineering or at the studios, John's right there with ascot on and little mustache, and no, he was the go-to for Walt as far as color theory and color choices.
What was his job formally?
Designer extraordinaire, really. No different than other designers, is just he had a penchant for color. He also was responsible for the annual portraits of Mickey for decades.
Yes.
He wrote a book too. He has probably the definitive Disney design book is John Hench's. I think it's Disney by Design, I think is the title.
Okay, so not just a designer, like the
he
designer.
also came from the studio.
He was
he was pre-studio. He was all filmmaking. All the other Mary Blair and Mark Davis and Claude Coates all came from the studio first.
Yeah, Herbie Ryman.
I think the point here
Herbie
is
did
that
come from the studio, right?
Yep.
Okay.
yeah, is that really you guys are second generation, because if he was the first next to Walt, you guys were learning directly from the masters.
Yeah. Well, Our inside joke was our claim to fame was we worked with the guy who worked with Walt.
Yeah. Yes.
Nice.
We were very lucky. And at that time when I was there in 88 to 92, way before the turn of the century, and Herbie Ryman was still wandering around. Claude Coates was still doing what he did. I'm trying to think of some of Maggie was there.
Yeah. And Peggy Van Pelt put together these things called designer enrichment dinners and lunches. And so all the young designers got an opportunity to have a meal with all those great folks. I was honored to be able to sit across from all of them, John Hench included, and Mark Davis, everybody. And just most of the time we were just gobsmacked and stunned silent because we couldn't believe we were in the same room with them. But I knew we knew it was special, but I don't think until hindsight we realized how fleeting that potential moment was. And all of them had been retired. They hadn't retired, they had been retired. And so a lot of them were a little grumpy about it, but just amazing, historians, and they touched everything that we held dear. It was them. They did it.
The fun part about them is they absolutely loved these lunches and hanging out with the young kids. Mm-hmm. And we'd all sit there and go, oh, we heard this story that you did da 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 da, and everybody is breathless, waiting for the whole story to unfold. And I remember one time X was there, and they were talking about, oh, and you did this in the Pirates of the Caribbean, and then and I believe Mark Davis was in the room too, and he turned to him and go, yeah, I don't remember that.
No, exactly.
The bubble got totally burst. Like, oh no, we were waiting breathlessly for the true story.
I think also you can see that in the Mark Davis book too, is that we always think of these things as just sort of immaculate conception attraction, where it just sort of came out perfect. No. But really both Pirates of the Caribbean and Haunted Mansion were a continuous fight for the mood and the tone. Well, Mark was considered the gag guy, and then you had Claude, who was sort of the set designer. They both had visions, and the visions didn't necessarily like each other. What makes those such classics is that tension between the humor and the drama and the painterliness of them. Same with Toontown. Toontown has lots of backstories as to what didn't make it. So the designers, we walk in there and we go, oh, it's too bad that didn't happen. But as far as someone who grew up with it, they can't imagine it ever having been anything but that.
Anything but.
Okay, wait a minute. I have to stop you and ask you, what didn't make it?
Many things. One can say that about all attractions, is that you aspire to, but then you value engineer to make something buildable. In one particular case, I was very passionate that we try to replicate the magic of New Orleans Square, in that New Orleans Square is just one street, but because it has sort of a figure 8 layout, it feels vast. You just feel like you can get lost in the streets of New Orleans. And so originally Toontown had a tunnel that bridged the island buildings so that you could approach it in various ways. And the project was over budget. And Mickey Steinberg, who was the vice president at the time, came in and looked at the model and said, you guys need to cut in a thick Southern accent, you need to cut $1 million. I want $1 million on my desk in the morning. And so someone took a knife to the model and cut off $1 million. And what was lost was that circulation, that we cut the tunnel out and shoved the two buildings together so that the post office and the firehouse were pushed together, and we lost an apartment building and a couple other buildings, but we got our $1 million out of it. And so every time I go to Toontown, it's like, if it had only had that circulation. But only me.
That's fair. That is definitely the curse of getting to be the designer, is what could have been.
Exactly right.
Yeah,
exactly right.
And I think value engineering is really, really two very, very dirty words when they're put together.
Yeah. But also it is definitely, there's no project we've ever worked on that didn't have that phase. That you go through the blue sky and the concept phase, you come up with a million things, and then you have to be real about what's affordable and what can be built. But you hope that you're at the table for that discussion. We know we have to cut stuff, but can I hold the knife too? It's where it doesn't work out is when you are not invited and things are unceremoniously cut without respect for what the story was you were trying to tell. And I've got lots of stories where that happened too.
That's definitely something. That's definitely something on our end, at least within my own company, that because the creative and the production departments are so hand in glove, that we do make sure that is always happening. Because you're right, like you can just cut out the heart of something, and if like, oh well, why did you do that? Well, we were trying to save money. Great. Well, here's all these fringes that really do not matter, but like preserve my heart. It's a tough, but it's necessary, because if you didn't have the opportunity to blue sky, you'd never land on the ultimately value engineered concept, right? And like reality is nothing we ever blue sky is ever going to be given a blank check.
Yeah, never. And also the realities of building something keeps you sober. Make sure that your design is going to function. So like I said, that it's that team back and forth and pulling and pushing to make it real has the greatest potential of making something that is better than just what was dreamed up at the beginning. Those happy accidents that happen out of the necessity of budget or the necessity of fire codes or the necessity can be what makes it special.
So fast forward to today, you have a knife and you're told to cut $1 million out of Mickey's Toontown. Would that be like...
That'd be a water fountain now.
Yeah.
Right. This is California.
That's easy. Just get rid of the water fountain.
That's gone.
This curb here.
Touche. You've got looks like a Meta Quest behind you over your shoulder, or at least the case for one.
Well, I've got several actually.
Several.
But job necessity.
How does virtual reality fit into your job necessity?
I've always been a real early adopter for incredibly selfish reasons, which is I'd really like the finished product to look vaguely like the thing I designed, and anything that is a tool that allows me to communicate to the team that I'm working with what that design is helpful. So sometimes that's a sketch, sometimes that's a 3D model, and more often it's let's go walk in it. And I've been a real proponent of using VR as a way to, like, a couple of weeks into concept, to get the team together and actually wander the site in its raw form, so that we can have epiphanies and understand what is and isn't working in ways that we just couldn't do before, when it was all just a flat piece of paper with CAD drawings on it. And so that has just been one of the many tools and focuses is creating environments that allow you to realize what the problems are really early on in the process, that in the past used to be not until you had a hard hat on and you realized that big $1 million tree really should be 3 feet to the left, and it will take $100,000 for them to move it, or you just have to live with it. That could have been figured out in VR long before you got that hard hat on.
Well, and that begs the question though, are there times when the VR lies to you in terms of what happens in reality, and what does that look like?
Absolutely. I mean, you're basically putting a camera on your eyeballs, and so you're gonna. What's happening is because you're seeing everything in stereo, you have a visceral sort of relationship with it. You could feel it. I'd say that probably VR is better as a vetting tool. And I'll use an example. I can't say what the project was, but when I was at the Hedema Group, our client wanted to do an entry tower as part of their project. And Scott St. Clair and I were talking about the fact that the model had that entry tower at 60 feet, and our client said they wanted it 80 feet. And when you approach the tower, you didn't have a lot of depth. You couldn't really get back from it. And so we were arguing, they're out of their mind, 80's too big, that's like extra money, why don't we just go with 60? 60 is fine. And then we went, oh, wait a minute, let's just bring both towers into VR, and we'll go stand in that plaza and look at the two of them and decide whether or not 60 works, because we really our reputations were going to be that it's going to be 60. And in about 3 seconds, both he and I went, nope, 80's better.
Yes.
And that just can't happen on paper.
Yeah.
And so the value of VR is that we now knew that was an important choice to make, and we were happy we did it there.
That's
And
very,
we
very
use
smart.
it also in architecture a lot more now. Obviously, I'm working on a project now that's I can't talk about, of course. And it's
Yes,
a
you
very
can.
small space, and we're packing a lot into it, and getting into it and walking around in the space and realizing, oh, I'm bumping into this and I'm bumping into that. And wait a minute, that ceiling is a lot lower than we thought it was. And what's that air duct doing right in front of graphics? You don't want that mistake in the field. That's dangerous. So yeah.
One of the things that's happening right now in the traditional architecture world, is a real pushback with the traditional architects and the use of VR as a tool to show the client what the project's looking like during the concept phase, because the architect was really the purveyor of all wisdom, and they were the ones that made decisions for their clients. As soon as you bring a client into a space, they have an opinion, but their opinion and knowledge of the space is based on the fact that they're physical beings walking around in the world. And so you can bring what would be considered a non-architectural discipline into a space, and they'll go, these doors seem too low, or this is a lot narrower than I thought it was going to be. And it does mean that the architect or the designer is giving up some of that control, but it's in service to the finished product, especially an architect who's building for a client. It's for the client. And the same is true of doing a ride. If you have a ride and then an engineer comes in and goes, I didn't know that your show set was going to interfere with this exit over here, we need to reevaluate that. That could have been missed on a CAD drawing, but it is not missed in virtual reality.